No, I'm thinking. It's what I'm thinking.
You can edit this anyway.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah. Okay.
Are we on?
Mm-hmm.
Action, Gigi.
Okay.
Scratch my nose to start with it.
We can edit all of this, don't worry, Grandma.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
Action. You did an introduction to introduce yourself.
I've got to introduce myself.
Yeah.
to all those future generations, Grandma.
Oh, right. This is an account of my life so that my grandchildren and great-grandchildren in the future will know something of what has gone before.
Very good.
All right?
Excellent.
Okay, so Grandma, just tell us a little bit about where and when you were born to start with.
I was born in 1926 in a nursing home in Blackheath in London, where my parents were living at that time.
Okay.
Not long after that, my father was transferred to Aberdeen to work in the civil service, and the three of us went up there for 2 years. We then came back and bought a house in 1929 in Kew Gardens, and there my brother Alan was born in 1929 in the same nursing home where I had been born earlier. We lived in that house for quite a while, and in 1935 my second brother was born. He was born at a nursing home in Richmond, and I can remember being taken to see him the day after he was born and seeing this baby in a cot beside my mother in the home, and it was a beautiful June weather with glorious sunshine, a bit like it is at the present moment.
So you would have been about 9?
Yes.
9 years old, yeah.
And we lived in that house as an ordinary family of five, weren't we then? For a number of years, and of course in 1939 war was declared and we were not evacuated from London. My father had a very strong air raid shelter built right deep down in the garden at the back of the house. He paid an enormous amount for it. I think probably, thinking about it afterwards, it was partly because he'd been very badly wounded and so on in the First World War and had gone through that. And I suspect he wanted to make sure that his family were going to be safe for things as they were coming on in the future. But we lived an ordinary sort of life during the war, went to school, had bombs around, had German airplanes going over at night time, anti-aircraft guns banging off around the place. There was a big anti-aircraft battery up in Richmond Park, just inside the gates there. And they weren't very far as the crow flew, and just so we could hear all those. And you used to get shrapnel down on the streets the following day. And sometimes it was still warm from the guns. We lived there until nearly the end of the war, when my parents decided they wanted a larger house, and they moved up to East Sheen, where they bought an Edwardian house in Palewell Park, which had a bit of bomb damage done to it, but not markedly so we were able to go on living there through the end of the war.
How long did you live there for?
How long did I live there for? Well, I left there long before my parents moved out, because I'd grown up and gone away by then.
And what age were you when you left home?
When I left home, when don't forget I went away to teach training college in Bristol.
And how old were you then?
I went early because you usually went to college when you were 18, but because it was the middle of the war, they reduced the age, and I went in at about 17 and a half. And so I was a fully trained, qualified teacher when I was 19 and a half, and the war was still on. And I'd had my first teaching job in Hammersmith, in a church school up there, which doesn't exist anymore. It's under the flyover that goes across there. It was demolished. The church is still there, but the school's gone. I was there for 2 years.
And living there, or?
No, just living at home with my
Living at home,
parents still. And then I went to a school a big primary school in Shepherd's Bush, and worked there. It was the largest primary school in the London area at that particular time, and it was a very jolly place to work in, young staff and so on. And that, of course, is where I met my husband, Tony, granddad.
So tell us
Grandpa.
a bit more of the detail around how you met exactly.
How I met him. Well, he was a student at St Mary's College, and that particular day the school that I was teaching in had a demonstration of being PE teachers, and some of the people who came over to watch it were the students from St Mary's College, all chaps, and they sat down in the body of the hall. The staff on the school were up in the balcony, so all the young ladies and staff up in the balcony eyed the gentleman down below. It was a nice mass of, and I always said that actually I wasn't looking at Grandpa, I was looking at the chap next to him. But he was the one who caught my eye. And when I got down at the end of the affair, he was standing waiting for me, and he walked me down to Shepherd's Bush station, made a date to take me out to dinner on the Saturday night, and that was the beginning of it. And that was it, really, as far as that was concerned.
So it's very much a mutual thing, you mean? It wasn't a case where...
Yes. He was at St Mary's College doing teacher training after 6.5 years in the army, and of course didn't have a penny to his name. And we got engaged during that sort of time, and knew that we couldn't possibly get married. We had no money to get married on at all. So we had to wait, because apart from anything else, when he finished his teacher training, he wanted to do a degree, and that was another 3 years to add on. So we had to think hard about that. But we went there. He was absolutely determined he was going to do it, and it stood him in good stead for the rest of his life. So we eventually, he proposed officially.
How did he propose, Grandma? How did he propose?
I was sitting on the grass in Green Park eating a toffee.
Okay.
Caramel kisses, they were called. And by that time I was working down in Devon, and I'd come up to London for a weekend, and I was going back on the milk train from Paddington back to Teignmouth, where I was working, and which is what I did. And then we had the years while he got his degree before we could get married. We did get married before he had actually got his degree. He was still a student, so we didn't have tuppence halfpenny to rub together, but we managed. And we found ourselves a flat in Rains Park, in Grand Drive in Rains Park. And
this is when you were engaged?
No. We had to wait to marry in those days.
Okay.
We got married and we lived in the flat there.
And your date of marriage, when was this?
February 1952.
And which year did you meet?
49.
Okay, so
got married in February 1952, and in November in 1952 we had our first child.
Exactly 9 months later.
9 months later, yes. A real honeymoon baby she was.
Full name.
Because we didn't live together beforehand in those days.
And that was Mum, so Penelope Ann Grist. And then...
And we lived with her in flat in Rains Park for about 4 years.
And you went back to work, didn't you?
I went back to work. I went back to work 6 months after Mum was born, Penny was born, because we had no money. And Grandpa had only just started working after getting his degree and his so on. So we really needed the money to live on, really. We decided that was things. And so I had a carer for her, and I used to have to take her in her pram round to the carer every morning and walk round, of course no cars, walk round, put her in with the person who was called Betty, Auntie Betty, who looked after Penny all day, and I went back to the bus stop and got 2 trolley buses to work, where I was teaching in Ham, just on the other side of Ham Common, in a primary school there, under Surrey County Council. And we grew up with family there for a while, very happily. And then Grandpa got a job up in Tottenham, and he used to leave the house at 7 o'clock in the morning and go down to Rains Park Station and had down to, was it, two trains a bus to get to work, something like that. And it wasn't too bad in the morning, the trains all fitted in beautifully, but in the evening it was a long journey home, and we decided that we couldn't possibly go on doing that forever. So we started house hunting, but there were very few houses at that time because it was the period after the war and new building hadn't gone on very much at that stage. But eventually we found a brand new house being built in near, just outside Palmer's Green. There were 10 houses being built on the site of an old convent, 5 semi-detached houses. So we all moved in as brand new people, mostly young people with children, and it made a very pleasant sort of set-up as far as that, in that respect. So that was our first proper home.
And you continued your job?
I didn't. I had to. No, I had
Okay.
to stop that one there at that time, and but the headmaster at the school where Grandpa was teaching wanted spare staff, so he asked if I would go and do supply work. Teachers were terribly short at that time, and they would take you at anyway. And I said, well, I can't, I've got a baby. He said, bring her in the pram. So I used to have to take her on the train to the school, and she was looked after along with some other children as well, from other members of staff, in the domestic science department all day. It's unheard of in these days. It would have been completely forbidden. Then eventually, I say, after we decided we wanted another child, and so we went for a second one, and Elizabeth was born. And 6 weeks after she was born, the local education officer rang me up and said, how was I feeling and was I ready to come back to work? And I said, no, thank you, not at the present moment. And we managed to scratch around for a bit of time on one salary. And then fortunately, the headmaster where Grandpa was teaching was had a headship offered to him for a big comprehensive school that was being built in Streatham on the other side of London. So he wanted to take some of the staff with him, including Grandpa. So we all moved over to Ashstead for the first time, so that we would be near enough for Grandpa to get to work on the train from there. And by that time, we had bought ourselves our first car. We bought it for £40. It was a big old Wolseley, and it was like a tank, but it was our faithful thing, and took an enormous number of children inside it. It was very big. And we bought a house in Newtonwood Road, backing onto the railway. So when Grandpa came past in the train, he would wave out of the window, and I would go out of the gate get the children in the car and be down at the station to meet him as the train came in. And then, while we were down there, we'd gone to Penny had gone to the local convent, and the Reverend Mother down there found out that I was a teacher, and they asked me if I would go and teach down in Ashstead in the convent. So I went down there for the 2 years, and I took Lizzie with me, and she was only a baby at the time, and she used to be looked after in the headmistress's office while I was actually teaching. And Mum was in the private prep school beside the convent. And then later on I moved from the state school into the convent and was with them until this time Grandpa applied for and got the headship of Cuthbert Mains School down in Torquay. So it was up 6 again.
So which year was this, Grandma? Or where?
1961.
Okay, and how old was Mum when you moved down to Devon?
She was 52. She was about 9, was she?
Should probably know that.
She and Lizzie both went in. Lizzie was. Yes, it would have been
Liz
that
had
because
started-
Lizzie was just about starting school properly.
Reception. Okay.
And they both went to the convent prep school, the Morris Convent Prep School in Paynton, and Lizzie was in reception class, and Mum was further up
Yeah.
the age group there. And from there they went on to the convent senior school and did their secondary education there, both of them.
It was private education, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Private education.
Private education, yes.
Something
And
we only found
at that
out
time,
recently.
the Cuthbert Mains School had opened and was going along very successfully, and I had gone to teach there. I'd had to give up my job in Surrey to come down here, so I'd offered my services to the local education department, and they said that they'd see if they could find somewhere for me. But on a couple of weeks before Cuthbert Mains School opened in January 1962, the local education office said to Grandpa, "You're entitled to another half-time teacher on your staff, and the only Catholic we've got in the district is your wife. Take her or leave her." So he decided that he would take me, and I stayed there for 20 years.
Gosh, 20 years. Right.
But eventually being full-time and in charge of a year head for the first year entry. And I stayed there until I retired. We moved around a bit from one house to another, but always were in Paynton.
So which house was it that Mum and Liz grew up in? Really?
Barkham Heights.
Barkham Heights,
Mm.
okay. And
Well, yes, but because by the time, I don't think Mum actually ever lived in Duchy Drive, not lived. She was married from there, but by that time she'd only been coming back as a student on holiday. That house, Lizzie lived in there for a spell. But
so you made the move when Mum was at university or college, you mean?
which move?
To Duchy?
Yes, yes, yeah.
So that would have been.
Difficult to I think Liz, when we were there, I mean, worked it out, Lizzie was about 17. I know she was studying for her A-levels when she was there.
So she would have been. So like.
She must have been at the.
So you moved up from the suburbs.
We moved down here from. Where are you going back to? The beginning, completely the beginning of it?
You were at Cuthbert Main.
Cuthbert Main School, yes.
Yeah, and you were living here in the suburbs.
No, we weren't. We were living down here in Devon.
In Devon.
But it was different from living in the London suburbs.
Yeah.
People tended to be much more local. They didn't go away on holidays. They used the locality for their holidays. They're flying abroad for the holidays hadn't really come into fashion at that time. But we'd made use of these beaches and the seaside and the moors, and thoroughly enjoyed life down here. People, friends and relations were very pleased to come and visit us during the holidays. Unfortunately, we had a big house, so we were able to put up uncles and aunts and nephews and nieces and friends and various relations a lot of the time.
What are some of your favourite summer memories of that period?
Oh, well, we had a beach hut down on the beach at Preston every year, and that was from the 1st of April to the 30th of September. And one year we made a special effort and went swimming on the 1st of April and again on the 30th of September, just to show that we had proved that we could use it all the way through. It's jolly cold too, but we did it. And it was very friendly down the beaches. Lots of other people were local people, and after work and after school and for the children, we used to go straight from school down to the beach hut, have tea down there, take off school uniforms and so, have tea down there. The children did their homework, and then they enjoyed the beaches and so on and the sea for the rest of the time, and didn't go home until it was getting dark and ready to go to bed. Some of the seasons, of course, weren't very good for weather, and you got a wet summer and you didn't enjoy it as much as all that, but we still used to go quite a lot of the time. And to say, well, there were other people there you knew, so it was the sort of social thing of the time.
And was it friends like Bernard and Kath were around at that time?
Oh, Bernard and Kath shared a beach hut with us.
Oh, right, okay.
And their children, Mary did. Oh, it was only Mary who came down, really. Peter did a bit. But John was around a bit. He wasn't so bad at that time. He became more incapacitated later on.
Right.
And to say it was a very comfortable sort of life. We used to go out the other way around. We'd drive out to Dartmoor, have picnics on the moors, and there were some wonderful streams to dam and play in and about. And sometimes we'd go out with friends or relations and take up picnics and bottles of wine and glasses and make a day of it up there. Life sort of chugged on. When Penny was in junior school, the junior prep school at the convent, she started to play tennis, which of course she's been doing ever since. And our life got drawn into that quite a lot. over the years, taking children to tennis tournaments, putting children up in houses, and taking, going across the country to tournaments in other areas, Bristol, London. Penny used to go up and stay with her grandmother so she could go to tournaments in London. And Lizzie, poor Lizzie, had to come anyway. She didn't get much choice over it.
And and Penny would have been how old at this time?
Well, I think she was starting to play so the under 12s.
Oh, okay.
And she sort of gradually went up until she got to the older ones, and then their school, the convent that they were in down in Paynton, was a very keen tennis school, and they competed across the country and ended up with junior Wimbledon, all the school tournaments at Wimbledon, and the school went up with teachers and parents and so on to see the matches up there as well.
Yeah. So if we take a step away from the chronology a little bit, just to open it up a bit more, so, over the years, your interests have changed and stuff. So, what have been some of your favourite things that you've done over your life's hobbies? Even what are your favourite colours and flowers and books?
My favourite.
What are your favourite flowers?
Favourite flowers. I like a lot of flowers actually. I've always had a garden and had flowers growing in the garden. And there weren't as many flowers in the shops then. Not all the supermarkets had flowers in like they do now, because they've learnt to grow them in places like Kenya and fly them in very easily. I like roses. And
what did Tony like bringing you?
Roses.
Roses.
Yes, carnations.
He's a romantic, wasn't he?
He used to buy me bits of jewellery.
And books over the years?
Books.
Were you an avid reader?
Oh, yes.
Like George?
Yeah, oh, yes, yes. Always books beside the bed. And
What were they? What kind of books?
Travel. Crime. Sagas.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of crime stories. Not much romantic stuff. That wasn't my scene particularly. Not the way it was written about. And yes, I think that was the sort of thing mostly. Liked all the crime books.
Yeah. Jumping around a bit, in terms of like what your trips that you've done over the years with the family or with Tony, what ones stick out as the classics? Obviously.
Well, the first apart from the trip that I did with my parents in 1939, which I think I've already spoken about, haven't I?
Yeah, that was one of the first.
The night trip back from, yes, that one.
Just near the war.
And then, of course, we couldn't do anything during the war years. And then my first trip after the war was a first of rather limited one, because the government restricted travel tremendously, and you weren't allowed to take cash out of the country except for £5, which in theory was supposed to come back with you, so that when you landed on English soil again, you'd got enough money to get you from the coast back to your own house. So really you had to go to stay with people who were prepared to pay for you. And I managed to get a trip like that to go to France at Easter time. And I think it was my mother was actually supposed to go, but she was looking after the children, and I got the chance to go instead. So I hadn't the vaguest idea where I was going. I went over on the cross-channel ferry. And in those days you had an open top deck, so you could go up on the deck, and it was a lovely rough crossing, great fun. And the English rugby team were going across to Paris to play France at the Easter. And quite a number of them were on the top deck being sick over the sides, and I felt fine. And we went down into the dining room with tables with white tablecloths and waiters in white coats, and you could there was food which you hadn't seen for a long time. And I remember having ham carved off the bone to have for my meal, and thoroughly enjoying every bit of it.
And how old were you at this time?
How old was I at the time? 1946. 20.
So 20, yeah.
Mm. And when I was met at a station called Amiens by the couple who were going to look after me, and the woman was the one who set it all up, and she said to me, did I mind not staying in the city in Amiens but to stay in their country property. Well, it sounded very nice, didn't it? So we got in the car, and the chap looked very surly and drove out like a bat out of hell out of Amiens, out into the dark countryside, until we screeched a halt in some village or other, where we found that we'd ended up in a rather primitive sort of farmhouse, and I was the only visitor in there. And it turned out that he was actually a black marketeer, and the top part of the house was absolutely crammed with black market food, and I hadn't seen as much food as that since my childhood, far before the war. So I fed extremely well there, but it was primitive. There was no plumbing, and I only got a jerry in my bedroom to use. As far as the toilet facilities were concerned, they took me to the back door, opened the house and said, voila, into the country. That was it.
Oh my goodness.
And they were a very odd couple, very odd couple. But that's it. It was extremely interesting. And I was taken to church on Easter Sunday, and I was taken to a big social affair that they had in the village, and I was introduced rather tactlessly by somebody or another to a woman who was in a wheelchair with no legs, and everybody pointed out that she'd actually had them shot down during a raid on the village by the Royal Air Force, which made me feel very embarrassed, but I couldn't do anything about it, could I?
No.
But on Easter Sunday, the children came round everybody's house with baskets collecting real eggs that had been painted and coloured for the Easter festivities. It's a very interesting time. Nobody spoke any English in the village except one chap he'd been in the army, and he'd come back after the war to marry a French girl, and he was my best person to talk to find out how things went. But it was a very interesting trip, and I wrote it up and sent it in to Woman's Hour, and they accepted it, and I read it out on the BBC in London and got 7 guineas for the privilege. That was quite a fortune in those days.
So on the radio?
On the radio, Woman's Hour, it's like it is still today.
Wow. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So you're 20 there, so this is how many years before you met Tony now? So you met Tony in...
No, this was, by this time I was married and got kids.
So but the trip to France, you when you were 20...
Yes, that was, I read that was before I got married. But I say I didn't write it up, obviously, till afterwards. Sure. So
your wedding day, I haven't heard the story of your wedding day with Tony.
No, that was a very modest little affair, because, of course, my parents didn't approve of him as a husband, and nobody from my family came to the wedding, which was down in Torquay. And Tony's parents were there, and his brother and sister-in-law, and some of my friends. But it was a quiet wedding.
Yeah.
Very quiet wedding.
Honeymoon?
We went to Salisbury.
Oh, Salisbury, nice.
Well, it was actually. It's very good history, and of course Tony loved the history side of it.
Yeah.
And we went and visited some of the. It was only a short one anyway. We hadn't got any money. It was during half term, and we went and visited various stately homes around.
Mm-hmm.
Enjoyed ourselves. Mind you, it was February. It was chilly. And then we went straight back to school, because it was just half term week. And I went back to the same place. I went back as Mrs. Grist instead of Miss Gregory.
Mm.
And then, of course, it wasn't long after that I discovered I was pregnant. Went to tell my headmaster that I was not going to be able to stay there any longer because I was pregnant and going to have a baby, when he informed me all about the regulations for maternity leave, which I'd never heard of before. And he persuaded me that I could come back after a year's maternity leave and back to my same post again, which is what I did.
Mm.
The only thing was that I didn't go back after a year. I went back when Penny was 6 months old, because we needed the cash so much. There wasn't a lot of money to get around in that time.
And you still know some of your students today?
No, not from those days.
Oh, not from those days?
Oh no, that wasn't until we came back to Devon.
Oh, that's Devon, okay. Right.
Mm.
So, you still know some of your Devon students?
Oh yes. They're my old pensioners now. Yeah.
So that was then, Penny was born.
Penny was born. And then we moved. After a time, we were in a rented flat at that time, and we decided that we wanted to have a house. We managed to find a house up in North London, so we moved up there, and there Lizzie was born up there, and we taught up there for not many years. And then when the headmaster up there, Jim Rudden, got a job down in Streatham, he took some of the staff with him, including Tony. And so we moved to Ashted for the first time. Bought a house down there. We only had 2 years down there. That's when Tony applied for and got the headship down in Devon. So we were back to Devon. Where at that time we were able to buy a very nice, extremely nice bungalow, because the difference prices in London and Devon prices was so big that it was the best place we've been able to move into.
Fantastic. And then Tony did really well with his headmastership.
Yes, yes, he pioneered this particular sort of thing in the school, and eventually his idea of combining Catholics and Anglicans was accepted over the country, so he used to go across to various parts of the country to give lectures on how you set up a school like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got his notes for that still upstairs. A bit sort of faded and rusty, but they're still there.
Yeah, fantastic.
He set that up. And it was taken up. And still there's one in Reigate. There's one up in North Wales. There's one up in Yorkshire. Those are some of the ones that he actually went up and visited, and used to go and see bishops and education officers and so on. So the boy did well. The boy did well. And
then when you come up with this was an Astor, you've never left Devon since then, is that correct?
He?
No, as you living, you've never lived
yes,
anywhere
we
else?
Went back to Ashted, didn't we?
Oh, that's right. You went. So you sold.
When Peter got his what would he have got then? Not professor, wasn't that just consultancy? Yes, that was it. He got his consultancy at St George's. Oh yes, at St George's, and they moved to Carshalton Beaches, and they suggested to us perhaps we would like to go up live near them. And my mother was up near, and my brother thought it would be a good idea for us to go up and help look after Mother. So we went up and for the second time bought a house in Ashted.
All right.
And we stayed there for 5 years, so we weren't very far from the family at Carshalton Beaches. And it was 5 very good years as far as the family was concerned. We got to know our grandchildren extremely well and had the joy of them coming over to see us regularly. They used to come over nearly every week for Sunday dinner at about 6 o'clock and have a roast dinner and nice puddings and video to watch, and then go home ready for Monday of the week. And that's when I worked in the Citizens Advice Bureau. When I'd finished teaching, I wanted something to do, and I went into the Citizens Advice Bureau in Torquay. Enjoyed the work very much indeed. Found it was a big challenge, completely different from anything I'd ever done before. So when I went up to London, up to Ashted, I thought I'd see if I could get some similar work up there. And I got a post in Sutton Citizens Advice Bureau, which of course was basically where the family was living. So I was able to combine things there. So for example, on I think it was Tuesdays, that I would go down to the library, which was downstairs from where I worked, to have lunch in the cafe down there, and Penny would pop in and we would have lunch together. And then sometimes if she was busy, I would pick the kids up from school and take them back to the house, and then Tony would join me as well, and then go back later on to sleep at the house in Ashted. But unfortunately, sort of during this time, Tony got ill, and he was never really as well again afterwards. He got cancer, and he didn't have sort of any interest up there. And so ultimately the call of Devon came again, and we came back down to Devon and moved into the house where I am at the present moment.
And how many years ago was that?
Gosh, must be about 20 years, mustn't it?
Yeah, all right, okay.
1989?
89, okay, yeah, so basically 18, 19 years ago.
And we couldn't find it. Found it quite difficult to find a place to at that time.
Oh, sorry, is it 89 you said?
89?
1989, that's 2018 now. So it's almost 30 years ago.
Really? Got it?
Yeah, so 89 to 2000 is 11 plus 18, so it's 29 years ago.
Well, it was certainly 89 because it was a couple of years after the 1987 huge storm.
Yeah.
Because that happened while we were in Ashted. It wasn't long after that we came back here.
So you've been here 29 years.
God, I've been as long as any house I've been in my life. And we only came into it as a stopgap because there was nothing else much on the market. So we thought, it'll do for a spell. And look at it.
Served you well.
Yeah.
Same carpet.
Yeah. Same curtains. Some of them.
So when you came down to Devon, when did you start getting so active with the church down here and your parish?
Oh, well, I'd always been active in the church and parish before we went.
Okay.
And because I'd been in with the church school, we were expected to do that anyway.
Right, okay.
So went to all sorts of things all around the area. Then when we went to Ashted, we went to the church up there and joined various things there for the 5 years we were there, and made some quite good friends up there. And then when we came back down here, we just sort of went back to where we'd been before. Went back and sat in the same benches in the same church, really.
Amazing.
Where Tony's parents had been from the time the church was built in something like 1932.
And over the last, has it been 10 years since Tony died?
Since he died, yes.
How long has it been? 10 years, is it now?
Yeah.
And you've been a steady part of the parish since then.
Oh yes, well, all the time
But
between.
you've seen priests come and go, and
Oh well, and we've all seen priests come and go from the time we came into. Well, the first time when we came down here, when 1962, when Tony came down as a head, and we got, because it was a church school, we got to know all the priests in the whole area,
yeah,
and we went to everything.
we're losing battery. Oh, that a bit better there, a bit of light. Fantastic. I mean, that's just
The first one I remember we went to was just Simon. Mum and Dad and I and Grandpa and I went to North Wales with him when he was only a baby. And then I don't think we went very much again until there was the whole family. And we went to country cottages in Norfolk. I wonder who that is. That's the front doorbell.
Yeah.
no. I'll pause it here.
No? Yes?
Action.
I was thinking really, apart from anything else, about the times that I've had with my family. My children, my grandchildren, my very happy time with my husband. I thought really how lucky I've been. I've lived to the age that I am now, with pretty good health. We haven't had many major disasters in the family. I think the saddest thing in earlier years was losing Peter's mum when she was only 52. But apart from that, we've had a very pleasant time with families getting on together and being able to mix with each other, growing up together, having the joy of seeing that. It's meant an enormous amount to me. And the fact that they will come and see me, and that I'm sort of welcome in amongst their brood, and how lovely it is to see the various generations grow up in, with them all now, with children, with including JJ, the late arrival. Yeah, been very lucky, very lucky. Yeah, a lot of people have far more problems than I have and have had in life. Happy marriage, happy families. No real sort of hardships and problems. I mean, things were tough at times, but not insurmountable. And a lot of pleasant times as well. So,
Do you have any regrets, Grandma, about anything?
well, it's difficult. I mean, I sometimes think that it was possibly a pity that we did leave Surrey and come back down here, even though life has worked out in quite a reasonable way, because I would have seen more of the family, more of the children and the grandchildren. I think that's all I would have said that I missed. Because I like my family. I do like my family. And yeah, I like them, believe it or not.
Yeah.
But then your career may not have been as successful as it was possibly up in Surrey.
Oh no, I wasn't thinking of that time. I think there was no sort of question that Grandpa had to do what he felt was the thing for him to do. I mean, all right, I didn't particularly want to come down. When he came down to be interviewed for the job down in Torquay, I was back at home in Ashton thinking, I hope he doesn't get that job, because I didn't really want to leave things as they were at that time. And that was before the family. That was only the two children, my own two children. But it. I mean, many things have been very successful, and a lot of things could have been far, far worse than they were. So, yeah, it was. Well, I don't think I have any real regrets. No, not really. No.
And where would you say was home for you? Where was your true home in all the houses you stayed in and areas you lived? Where would you always be pulled back to?
Difficult to say that, isn't it? When I go up to the London area, the Surrey area, and I get driven around a bit up there, I still feel there's part of my life that goes back to my childhood days when we lived in Kew and Richmond and East Sheen. It's a lovely area of London to live in, and there were a lot of places that sort of grew up with that I've always had fond memories of. In places like Hampton Court, going up to London, going up on the trains, going up to the theatres, all that sort of thing was part of London living. And you go back there and there's a certain sort of, still a little bit of buzz about it. When I went up for Simon and Kelly's wedding, and Lizzie and Roger drove me up through London that Saturday morning, and we came back through the area. Well, we came back through Richmond and came past where the grammar school that I'd been to had been, and we went along the road that I cycled down to school every day. It was amazing how familiar it was after all those. I mean, it's expanded. It's a wide road now, and bigger buildings and things like that. There was something there that's part of me, and I still see those things on television sometimes, and I think, yeah, I know that. Watch the boat race, and I think I can remember when I stood on the banks of that every year with my pale blue Cambridge thing on, watching those things. So it's all ingrained. It was a lovely area to be in. Lots of memories. Lots of things happened.
What's your fondest memory?
Fondest memory?
No, any fond memories you have of...
Oh.
What are you saying about the war and the air raid shelter and...
Oh, that wasn't fond memories.
No, but
it was just a memory.
Thinking,
Vivid memories. Vivid.
I was just thinking that was during the time it would be most memorable for you.
It's funny how you talk about what it was like when you lived through the war years, because people say it must have been awful, but it wasn't all the time. And there was a lot of camaraderie that went on there, and people pulled together over it. So you still have memories of different things. Even sort of finding that the greengrocers had got onions in, and there were queues to go and buy onions. So you got onions with your meals.
Seems bizarre to us.
I know, it's crazy, isn't it? And we didn't have bananas, didn't see a banana for years, nor oranges. But it was all just part of it. But, I mean, even now I can think of course, Richmond was a lovely place, and you walk up Richmond Hill and stand at the top by Star and Garter Homes and look over to the Richmond Valley. And it's exactly the same now from that point of view as it was 100 years ago. You know, if you take out the ordinary things, you can't change the main contours of the place. And you stand in the middle of Richmond Park, and you could be in there certainly 100 years ago, and it would have been just the same. A few more cars no cars then, of course, but the contours of the place, and you get it off the roads, and it's still as it was there. And if I go up what used to call Test Hill, I bet the big oak at the top there's still there now, as it was when I went up as a child, cycling up round there just for fun.
how old are you doing that? How old are you doing that?
How old was I doing that? Well, I was in my teens.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm.
It's a good
I mean, I had my first big bike, decent big bike, which was a Rudge Whitworth.
So 75 years ago. So what's life like now? So fast forwarding now,
What's life like
we're in
now?
Paynton in 2018. You're in your 90s. What's life like today?
Well, I'm perfectly happy. I'm quite contented. I'm frustrated by the fact that I can't see properly, that I'm restricted from doing things because my joints won't work properly, but I can still understand things, fortunately. I still have lots of lovely phone calls from people keeping me up with the family, and of course I now have the pleasure of iPads, which means you can actually see what's been going on yesterday or even today. So you're not out of touch with things, and
A lot of people your generation are though, Grandma. You're very good that way, at keeping in the loop.
oh, am I? Okay, yeah, if you say so.
Well, compared to your peers,
Oh, well, I suppose some of them are all right.
iPads and
Oh, yeah.
mobile phones.
Oh, well, some of them have got the things. They're not the only one who's got them.
But it helps you feel connected in with everything.
Oh,
You know,
gosh, yes, I like to see what's
Yeah,
going
no way.
on. Have a laugh at some of the things that the kids do and situation. And of course, the other thing that makes you feel more connected long term is that when people go away and out of the country, you haven't lost them. Right, Lizzie and Roger have come back from a holiday in Canada where we had a sort of daily report on what they did, and it was a very good one, I might say. She wrote them well. Penny and Peter did things out in, they've done Australia and India and so on and so forth, and various places, and there are always things coming. You never feel lost, you're never left out on a limb as far as that's concerned. The world's a small place nowadays. When I was a kid and my father's sister, my aunt, went off to India, it took them 3 weeks to get there. And there was no mail coming backwards and forwards at that sort of stage. So you never really knew them like that. Now, you know what they had to eat on the plane on the way out. And you know what films they watched. And everything. I mean, you're not lost from anything now, are you? You know that.
Highly connected. I mean, your generation has experienced something that I don't think anyone.
I don't
will
think anything
experience
will be
again.
as fast. None of it will be as fast. Nothing can be as fast as the gap between going to war in 1939 and what goes on now with things around the world, terrorism and skirmishes in one way and another. If they were happening, we didn't know about them.
Yeah.
That was the thing. We didn't know what went on. It was a long time before the things got passed around to everybody.
Yeah. I mean, the witness of, basically going from an analog era to a digital era. We joke about saying if you resurrected our great grandparents and shoved them in this world, they'd be, they'd think they're on a different planet. I think you've experienced such advances. I think it's that you're the last generation, I think, to see us in a
we saw a
very
lot of
basic
things.
way to now such an advanced civilization.
Yeah, I mean, when things sort of got going after the war years, there was such a resurgence, and that once something got invented, if you could afford it, then you tried to have it. Mechanical things, washing machines, cars, everything you could think of. It's sort of developed when you think back over these years.
The
things that-
microwave.
yes.
Do you remember that came in? Was that in the
Yeah.
60s, wasn't it?
Yeah, something like that. And mobile phone. What about mobile phones? What
Yeah.
have they done? We're always in touch with people. You don't need to be alone in that respect.
No.
I think of course, I think one of the things that's a great bonus is what your state of health is, and whether you can still understand what's going on. If your brain's gone, you've had it anyway.
Yeah. Agreed.
Doesn't matter what there is invented around the place. If you don't understand how to work the thing, you haven't got a hope. I muddle through what I can get to do the best I can with my family laughing like drains at the other end, saying, "What's Grandma done now?"
You don't blame that on age though, do you, Grandma?
What?
Are you blaming that on age, or are you blaming that on your,
Well,
your
it's
generation of just...
well, no. Well, I blame it. I
Less
know if I
techie.
could see properly, I would be doing a lot more than that. I mean, I had gone to computer courses, and I was getting on extremely well until gradually the screen sort of disappeared, and I had to give up, and I couldn't use a computer anymore. I mean, I could do things like spreadsheets. 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 I couldn't do any sheet now.
No.
But that's my particular bad luck, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well,
But-
you're outliving everyone, you know.
No, that my sight's gone.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, I can still understand things. I can still enjoy life. I can still laugh at things. And by and large, I understand quite a number of the things that are given to me, even if not the technical things,
Yeah.
which I say keeps my family going anyway.
Gives us things to do.
Mm.
I can't remember. Tell us a little bit about where you or when you found your faith. How about that? Would that start you off?
Well,
Or
I mean, it's the same things that are so different. I always went to church and to Sunday school. As a child, we lived 2 doors away from the church actually when we were in Kew as children. So I think my mother was always happy to get us sent off to the children's service on Sunday mornings. Anyway, I've always gone to church. When I went away to Teachers Training College, I went to a High Church of England training college, and it was while I was there that I started going to Mass on Sundays sometimes in a Roman Catholic church. And then later on, of course after that, I met Tony, and our thoughts over things gelled pretty solidly, so that I was happy to go along with it. It worked out for me. And we felt sort of...
Well, explain that a little bit, Grandma, about your change of faith when you married Grandpa.
Well, I didn't change my faith to marry him. I would have stayed... I had changed my faith before I married him. And if I hadn't married him, I think I would have gone on anyway. If the thing had broken up, I think I would have gone on anyway. Because I was in that direction before I even met him.
So you brought up Church of England,
Yes,
and then
what we called High Church, which was fairly near to Roman Catholic teaching and so on. But my mother's family had always been a church-going family. Father's didn't, but then they were seafaring people, so they were all round the world, so they wouldn't have done it in the same sort of way. But I can remember seeing my great-grandfather he was in his 90s, taken to church in Fulham Palace Road in his wheelchair, pushed by one of his daughters to church on Sunday morning, in his bowler hat and his black jacket and his pinstripe trousers, looking as smart, and stiff white collar, looking as smart as paint. So there's always been religion there.
Mm.
It was just sort of part of the thing. And I would have felt a gap without it. I don't think I ever had a spell when I didn't, as it were, didn't go to church. I've always gone to church.
And did it change when Grandpa passed?
Did I?
Did anything change when Grandpa passed with, your beliefs and
Oh no.
faith?
You know, he knew, I knew he had to go. I mean, from that point of view, you could only wish him Godspeed and hope that what came on the other side was fine as far as he was concerned. He had a very peaceful passing, 2 minutes to 11, when he went, and he squeezed his hand in my hand as he did, and you felt that he'd had several years of really not very pleasant life, and it was a blessed relief for him that he didn't have to put up with that any longer. So from that point of view, I didn't mourn him. I missed him, that's different. I missed having him around, but I was never sad for him like that, because he'd served his time. He'd served his time. And I still feel his presence, his sort of comfort around. I've never felt as though I've been without him, ever. He's always there. He's always my proper mainstay.
Mm.
Nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
I liked him.
But then this house, if you had moved from this house or gone to an apartment somewhere like it been discussed, do you think it wouldn't feel the same though, would it? That maybe that connection is because you're here still.
Oh well, it doesn't. It does help that it's a sort of a familiar thing as far as that's concerned. But I don't sort of dwelling on it. I don't sort of sit at the chair and think, well, he used to sit there or things like that. I mean, I think I could go and live somewhere else and still feel him.
But it's been, you've been here now.
Longer than any house I've ever lived in my life.
February 2008 was Grandpa's passing.
He's 10 years he's gone this year.
Yeah, 10 years. So it's been a long time, but you've been in this house since then, which I think's been a really good thing.
But you've never seen me go around looking miserable and morbid and
No.
and
No.
and
Not that way.
grumbling about how sad I was that he wasn't there or anything like that, because I don't feel like that.
No.
He's always been part of the thing, and of course they're all sort of the anecdotes of the things that he did with the family.
Mm.
Some of the things, sitting in the silly hats playing
Yeah,
games.
got photos.
Cluedo and
Yes.
all those things.
Yeah.
I used to get cross with him at times over things. Who doesn't, but we used to. Don't shout at me, he'd say. I'm trying my best.
He didn't ever raise his voice, did he? Well, we
Oh,
didn't ever know.
I've heard him raise his voice at school. Sir! When Sir got going.
But he mellowed like you did in his retirement.
Oh yes, well we both mellowed, didn't we? Yes.
I always remember you calling him Tone. That's what I remember. That's what my memory of.
Tone!
Yeah,
Yes,
like,
Tone!
yes, dear. That's because I never had grandparents, so
Yeah.
you and Grandpa filled that gap for me, and still have beautifully.
Mm.
So it's been very nice.
But I mean, you people coming along behind and so on and so forth, you're still very fortunate. You've got a very good, solid background of family around you, with Mum and Dad and the other siblings, and with Lizzie and Roger. I mean, there's a lot there, and you've got your parents and your parents, both of them still,
Yeah.
and your connections with your brothers and sisters-in-law and so on and so forth. And some people haven't got anything to think beyond for at all. I mean, right, you can curse them at times and grumble about them and think they're not much good, or you don't particularly bother, you want to be bothered with them, but it's a sort of something there, isn't there? There's something there.
Family first, everything.
Well, I mean, look at you going out to see your brother out in Vietnam with your father. I mean, that was a labour of love, and a bonding. And the fact that there's still all that family around who think that way, it rubs off all the time. It all rubs off. But you have to work on it. It doesn't just happen.
What's your final kind of message to your grandchildren and future generations from there?
To my grandchildren, I don't think I have a lot of messages to my grandchildren to keep persevering. I think they all seem to have done pretty well on the whole, as far as things have gone to date. They're nice to talk to, pleasant to listen to. I wish them all success, all of them success in what they do, and that they have good health, which is, of course, a hell of a bonus, because we haven't had a lot of traumas in the family, as some families have some terrible sort of things to cope with in the way of illnesses and so on, businesses failing, all sorts of things on the way up. But we've been remarkably lucky, haven't we? We haven't been to many funerals, and certainly not family ones.
No.
I was sorry that my brother died when he was younger than, nearly 10 years younger than me, and has predeceased me. I think that was a pity that it worked out like that. But you can't put these things back. Nothing happens that you can do about it. And nothing that I can say that when I talk to Doreen makes it any easier for her to understand what I've got. I mean, she and Don had 3 daughters and no marriages or grandchildren. And it was always a source of great sorrow to them that they had nobody to go on to later on. And I used to feel almost guilty that I've got grandchildren, children to children, and one couple who produced so many that we've got around now. With Penny and Peter having their 4, and then the marriages afterwards, and the families after that as well. We haven't had major illnesses. I mean, think of the major illnesses that families have with the babies as well. Yeah. You're another generation down. You've got children who are healthy children. The others have got children who are healthy children. It's a great bonus, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you hear the sadnesses that people have got. And you see some of the things on television and you think, my goodness me, how ever do they cope with that?
Well, you're like Catherine Bernard.
Well, quite, yes. And nothing you could have done could help them or put it right for them. Nothing. I can remember with Catherine Bernard, not long after. No, I think it was just before he died, and then I met somebody down in the town, and we were chatting about them and saying how dreadful the life was with John, and how sad it was, and that when he went, because he was in a terrible state by that time, it would be a blessed release, But it wasn't, as far as Bernard and Kath were concerned, it was the most horrific thing that ever happened to them.
What, to have that sort of void, you mean?
They didn't see it as a release for him. They just felt that life had been cruel as far as that was concerned. They never got over it. Never.
No. And he was, how old was he?
I think he was about 14 when he actually
yeah.
died. He just about reached puberty.
Yeah, I mean, their whole lives were committed
I know.
to him for all that time.
But then you could never talk about it, you could never discuss it. And you could never think of any sort of joy of the time with him. It was always the deep, deep sadness, which was so hard for them.
Yeah.
They missed so much. And when you've got all the things yourselves, it's hard. I mean, all right, Bernard sat there, didn't he?
Yeah.
And watched Jessica do one of her green screen ab-dab things there.
Yeah.
Well, he didn't have that chance, did he, with his thing that. His...
No.
Yeah.
No, they were dealt a tough hand, they were.
Mary hasn't had any children. No, that's a lie. She had Ollie. But nobody went on after that. And they just didn't have the things. I mean, Peter disappeared to America and hadn't got the bond there either. No, it's the local bond that makes the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that's enough, isn't it? Anything else,
Yeah,
madam?
no, that's good, Grandma. Really good. I'll take the chicken out the oven.
Load of cold what?
Let me take the chicken out.
That's great.
That will give you all a chance to have a good laugh, won't it?
That was a good kind of update and all that kind of stuff. Seems to, when you talk about it like that, it seems like it goes really fast, doesn't it? You know, in terms of like you did this, did that, and then 90 years seems to happen 90 odd years seems to happen quite quickly, doesn't it? When you kind of break it down, does it feel that way? A little bit.
All of it.
Yeah. No, that's great, Grandma. I think we'll cut off now.
Yes, okay.